Good morning, everyone. I'm Juliette Mayers, and welcome to Building Inclusive Networks. We're delighted that you could join us here today for this exciting topic. I'm so excited I can't talk. But before we get started, we have a little bit of housekeeping that I want to go over with you. Oops. And the first is that this webinar is recorded. Attendees are automatically muted upon entry. And if you have questions, which we hope that you will, please use the questions, the Q&A box for your questions, and we'll be sure to get to them. What we'll be doing throughout the session is holding questions until appropriate intervals. That way we can get through most of the content and also allocate enough time for you to have lots of Q&A with the panel and so forth. If you're having technical difficulties, please use the chat box and you can type in your issues there. And one thing that I want to share with you that I'm so excited about is that we have a free workbook for you, and the workbook is basically an excerpt from the Guide to Strategic Networking, and it allows you the opportunity to create your action plan and to actually take the steps that we'll be going over today and make them real for yourself and for your situation. So we're really excited about that. And our panelists also have wonderful resources that they'll be sharing with you. And at the end of the session, you'll get access to both the free workbook and to the information and resources that our panelists will be sharing. The polling, what we'll be doing throughout the session is taking your pulse on a couple of questions here and there. And I am actually going to get started by introducing that right now. And so you'll notice on your screen, once I launch the poll, there'll be a pop-up that will appear on your screen shortly, the question. And so the first one is, hopefully you can see that. Which of the following best reflects your primary interest for inclusive networking? And it's multiple choice, so you can go ahead and use your buttons to vote right now on that question. Give you a few seconds. Okay, I'm not seeing. Okay. Oh, I see. People are saying that they're not seeing the polling button for some reason. Let me stop that and relaunch it. Hang on for a second. Try it again. So. Okay, so much for that polling question. we're gonna move on, and perhaps our tech person can help us with that a little later in the session. But so be thinking about that, and I'll come back to you later. And I see that we already have a few questions coming in, so thank you for that. Okay, moving right along. So here's our agenda for today. In a few minutes, I'm going to essentially, well, right now, of course, we're doing the welcome and introduction. And in a few minutes, I'm going to walk you through my model for strategic networking. And we're going to basically lay the foundation for our discussion with the panel, our executive panel later on. And after I do the presentation, I'll be pausing and answering some of your questions. We have had some questions come in already from people who submitted questions when they registered, so we'll do those. And additionally, we'll take any questions that you may have in the Q&A section. And for some reason we're not able to get all the questions today, I commit to you that I will follow up with you to make sure that your questions are answered. So thank you for that. And as I mentioned previously, we'll have a Q&A session as well at the end of the panel discussion. Okay. So this is our fabulous panel, which I am so delighted to introduce to you. You have the full bios, but I do want to start by first thanking Eastern Bank, and AIM for sponsoring today's webinar. Really appreciate that. And we have our fabulous Rita Allen, who is the president of the Boston Club. Welcome, Rita. Quincy Miller, who's the president and vice chair of Eastern Bank. And John Regan, who's the president and CEO of Associated Industries of Massachusetts. And they'll be talking a little bit more about their businesses and how it relates to strategic networking and inclusive networking in this age where we're having to do so virtually. So welcome everyone, and we are delighted to have you all. Now we're living in an age of, COVID ID, where all of us are having to adapt to a new shared reality. And it's, as leaders, it's difficult for us. And I know that many of the people who are calling into this are in management and leadership roles, but also for your teams. And one of the things that I found striking in the recent data is the CDC's report in terms of how the disparities have really been emphasized relative to racial and ethnic disparities in our healthcare system, which really fundamentally show the issues that we have in terms of diversity and inclusion that are really now just being magnified by the COVID ID situation. Having said that, it's really important that we all pay attention to, in addition to physically distancing, I don't really like the social distancing because we really need to stay connected, right? We need to make sure that we are connecting to each other, helping each other, continuing to network, increasing business effectiveness. And so it's important that we find a way to stay engaged socially, both with our teams, for those of us who are in leadership positions, as well as in terms of developing our respective networks. And so part of that also should be, how are we paying attention to people who may be traditionally marginalized or not feeling as included? And so part of that work as a leader is to pay attention to that and factor that into what we're doing relative to our networking strategy. So I want to start by telling you a little bit about Inspiration Zone. I know some of you are aware of Inspiration Zone, and you've come to our full day sessions, and it's been quite interesting trying to take material from, a day-long session and packing it into a shorter session, but this is the time that we're living in, so I'm very excited to host you all today. But what we do pretty much is help organizations and executives with diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies. And part of that, and a very important part of that, is connecting people to the appropriate resources, networks, and so forth. Also, leadership development is part of our offerings, and very excited to have worked with some fabulous companies, one of which you'll hear a bit more about today, because I'll be using Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts as one of our best practice examples. So everything that we'll be talking about here today is included in the Guide to Strategic Networking and A Black Woman's Guide to Networking, save for what's happening right now in our current environment, which has really shown a light on some of the issues that we really need to address and continue to persist. So in writing both of my books, the first one came out in 2011, A Black Woman's Guide to Networking, and the Guide to Strategic Networking in 2015, one of the things that I found fascinating was the paying attention to the research and delving into some of the challenges and barriers that get in our way in terms of striving to have diverse networks. So we'll be talking a little bit more about that today. And again, very, very excited to have you as part of the journey. So our three basic objectives, and they could have been many, right? They're given all the topic, but in trying to narrow the focus, we're going to be talking about strategic networking in terms of a strategic approach to building business relationships. And as a part of that, how does one achieve more diverse and inclusive networks, something that we're all trying to do, and research has shown to be very beneficial both for businesses and also for individuals. We'll also be talking about tips that you can use to cultivate those relationships and also to tier your network, because we are all part of multiple networks. And if you're not, we really should be, right? And so we'll be talking about that as well. And lastly, but certainly not least, we'll be connecting you to resources and tools, both in terms of networking, but also from our participating organizations and executive panel here today. So stay tuned. You know, when I talk about networking and really just my story in general, one of the things I've heard from leaders repeatedly as I've engaged with them is that it's such a tough haul, and most people don't want to admit that they absolutely hate networking, or some see it as a dirty word, you know, something you really only do when you absolutely have to find a job is usually when people are thinking about it. But for those who understand the benefit of really cultivating strategic relationships early on, they have found networking to be very, very invaluable, both inside of the organizations, for those of you who are in corporate America, which many of you are, but also for those of you who are in not-for-profit or who may be running your own businesses. And for me, my story, when I thought, you know what, I'm going to start sharing my story, because the people who feel like it's so difficult and they just don't have access and just couldn't be them, I say to them, start by telling them this. Imagine a little girl in the island of Barbados, growing up in a 2-room shack, no running water, no electricity, no networks, not knowing anybody who one would consider highly influential. And that was certainly my story. And my mom was a single mom with 3 daughters, and she was a very strategic person. She didn't have a formal education. I would say she had the equivalent of a 5th grade education, but she had a dream, and she instilled in each and every one of her daughters the importance of dreaming big, having a plan, and also being persistent at the things that are important to you. I found this fascinating, given that, as I said, we were living in a 2-room shack, no running water, all of that. However, I did internalize my mom's vision for myself and my sisters. And as a result of that, those basic 10 A's, I was able to cultivate the kinds of relationships I saw her cultivate as someone who started from a place of what people would say was nothing. And so that really inspired me, particularly as a professional, to dream big. Obviously, fast forward, here I am, and I consider myself living the American dream. And so my point in telling that story is, if someone who has absolutely nothing can follow that model, certainly those of us who have a lot more can benefit from following those principles as well. So let me start by telling you a little bit the definition of strategic networking. Of course, you may have figured it out by now. It's networking in ways that are aligned with your vision and strategy. But that means first having a vision and strategy, right? And many of us do it for, you know, when we our own work environments, the jobs that we have, we plan, we create plans, we have business plans, we follow those business plans, we monitor them. However, when it comes to networking or for cultivating relationships that are so important to our effectiveness, both inside the organization and outside, few of us have those kinds of plans. So what I'm here to tell you, and what I have learned through research and also by talking to people who have been very, very successful, even beyond my level of success, is that this basic framework has been effective. And so as you're thinking about creating plans for everybody else, think about yourself and think about your organization. And so that dream, plan, create, achieve model, which is basically a basic framework that I took from modeling what my mother did, is the one that I continue to use. I've used it in my books. I continue to use it. And it's also the one that you will find in the free workbook that you will be getting at the end of this session. So I encourage you to complete those exercises. And I'm not going to go through each of them. They're sort of self-explanatory, but what I will say is that the dream part is essential, because if you don't know where you're going, you're certainly not going to get there, or you might get there, which is nowhere, right? Which is not what we want. And so let me transition to the 3 tips that I think are important for strategic networking. Now, writing down your plan, and again, many of us who are either in corporate or business owners write down our plans. As it relates to networking, this is really important that you do this as well. And treat it, and if you refuse to write it down, at least have a mental note of what it is you're trying to achieve. So as a part of that, certainly your brand has a significant impact on your ability to network effectively. And so it's important that you think about nurturing and cultivating the kinds of activities that help you to build your brand as a part of that. And certainly embracing differences. Now, this is one, given the topic that we're talking about, that is and continues to be a struggle for many, many people. And I would say, depending on the topic you're talking about, I'd have to put myself in that category too, right? Because we all come to this with our various lenses, and those lenses tend to be biased in some way. And yes, I said biased. We are all biased. We all have unconscious bias. And so making sure that you spend the time to understand what your blind spots may be, so that they don't hinder you when it comes to reaching out or trying to build those various networks that are so critical for your success. So the next question, and I'm not sure, Angela, if we are able to fix our poll, but we do have a poll question on this, and if you'll bear with me, we'll try it again and see if this one works. Who is in your network one?
Go ahead, Juliette, give it a shot.
Is it okay? Let's see. Okay, watch. Okay, so I'll be able to tell if you're seeing that, because you can read it and respond to it. Yes, it's working. Woo! So how diverse is your network? Are most of the people in your network, are they of the same race or ethnicity, or are they not of the same race and ethnicity? And so I'll give folks a chance to vote on that. We still have a few more people. And once everyone's voted, I'll go ahead and share the poll. Just give 5 more seconds. But I'm seeing the pattern already. I'm pretty sure we can predict this, even if I were to stop it right now. Okay, terrific. Okay. So we're going to end the poll, and I'll share the results. Okay. As you can see, most people said not of the same race or ethnicity, and I'm absolutely not surprised. And that's true for myself as well, quite frankly, because the reality of it is most of us have networks and circles that we grow up with people in certain areas, and quite frankly, we feel more comfortable with people who look like us, behave like us, have things in common like us. And it's a little tougher to bridge those divides where we may not have natural affinities with people. So there's no judgment at all. That's the point of the conversation, for us to think about how we can address these differences and make sure that we're expanding our network beyond the people who are like us. So this lovely image here, what's getting in your way? It's a question. And I titled it The Face of Fear, right? Because at the root of it, we all have some basic fear of, oh my God, I don't want to say the wrong thing. And oh my God, God forbid I'm called racist. And oh my God, what if my intentions are misinterpreted by this one? And we can go on and on of all of the different fear factors that raise up the barriers when it comes to reaching out to others who are different from us, whether it's in those various dimensions that I mentioned or some other variation. And so that's certainly one of the hurdles that we have to overcome, right? And then as we think about those diverse and inclusive networks, another key area that is a big challenge is trust, you know? So how do we bridge that divide? We have, because of the basic biases that many of us have, it's so difficult to just trust, right? So how do we get over trusting someone that we don't really know much about, and how do we build up to being able to have that trust? Because people do business with people they like, people they trust, right? And so it's very important that we figure out how do we overcome these hurdles, and I'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. And then the other areas that I'm sure all of you have heard is, well, you know, I don't know if I know anyone in that yet. I know we need more, we need to be more inclusive of, let's say, of Blacks and African Americans on our board. However, I don't really know anyone. So how do I even broach that conversation or that barrier? You know what, it's just easier to continue to do what I'm doing, and maybe I'll bump into someone. So I'm making a little fun of this, but it's very, very serious, because the reality of it is, when we have challenges in other areas, any business problem, you tackle the business problem, you say, okay, I need more education on X, right? And so we reach out and we go and we get education, or we bring in a consultant, or we hire someone who can help us with the dimension that we're trying to, the problem we're trying to solve for. And so I think we need to step back and think about this from a relational standpoint too. These barriers that I mentioned, most of us know somebody, right, who is has that dimension that we're looking for, or that barrier that we're trying to address. So one such way, obviously, is to reach out to those you already know and to ask for their support. Be candid about what you know and what you don't know, and broach the relationship that way. Obviously, introductions are very, very powerful as well, because if someone is introducing me to someone else and I have trust in that person, I'm more likely to extend that, so they get the benefit of that social capital from the other person when somebody that I know and trust are introducing them. So that's certainly another way that we can do it. But let's say that, oh my God, none of those seem to be working for me. What else can I do? Certainly joining organizations, reaching out, and cultivating, that means you have to come up with your own plan of, okay, how am I going to address this? You can go to conferences, right? You can read books. You can look for organizations with certain kinds of affinities. You can volunteer for organizations that you know have will expose you to the kind of diversity that you're looking to attract. So there are many, many ways in which you can do it. And I think part of it is really being intentional about diversity and inclusion, and thinking about strategically how we address the barriers that we have. And so that leads me to the case study, the mini case study that I mentioned to you, Blue Cross Blue Shield, which we'll talk about in a second. But Blue Cross Blue Shield is an organization that I not only worked for a while back, and I know some of the Blue Cross people are on the webinar, welcome. But it's also an organization that engaged me after I launched my consulting practice to work with them on coming up with a solution to how do we go about making sure that we're building the talent pipeline. And this was specific to talent acquisition. So what we did, and the program is called the Talent Ambassadors Program. So I worked with Stephanie Brown, who is the Vice President of Talent Acquisition, Diversity and Inclusion, and her team to tackle this in terms of, okay, how do we make sure we are reaching out to groups, people's communities, in order to attract the kind of talent that we are hoping to support our strategy. And so we did this in a more formal way, in the sense that starting again with the people that we knew inside the organization, giving people employees an opportunity to raise their hand to say, you know what, I have an interest in diversity and inclusion. I have an interest in reaching out. I'd like to participate in this Talent Ambassador program. And the ambassadors are essentially brand ambassadors for the organization. And so in addition to people volunteering and being coming forward, they were trained. So we provided training and education to make sure that everyone had a basic foundational understanding of what these various dimensions of diversity and groups that and people that we're trying to reach out to, that they had that basic understanding. And we also provided education to the ambassadors themselves so that from a growth standpoint, they were getting some benefit out of it as well. Additionally, we identified different organizations outside of the company where people could network. So part of the role of the ambassador is to network strategically with these various organizations. Certainly from a multicultural standpoint, Get Connected is a very popular one that people participate in. For Conexión, Amplify Latinx, there are many wonderful organizations. And then from a business standpoint, you know, internally, what is it that we can do to ensure that we're making those cross connections internally for employees as well? Because we all know that to the extent that we are building those bridges internally and strengthening those relationships, when the time comes for a position to be opened or to have assistance with something, we have a ready pool of talent who is trained, who is diverse, who has strength and trust into their respective networks, who can then help the organization to realize its goal of achieving greater diversity. So it's been a very effective program. And so congratulations to Blue Cross and to Stephanie for the work that they are doing and continuing to do. But that's just one example of when I say, if you have a problem and you're really deliberate and intentional about it, there are ways to solve it. So a word of encouragement, shall we say. And so this brings me to the, people all the time, oh my God, you have so many connections, so many people, how on earth do you keep track of it all? And we are all so busy. We have LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, all of these various things that we have to keep up with. And now in this age of the global pandemic, it's even more difficult because people who are actually working from home are saying, you know what, I'm actually working from home. And sometimes it becomes difficult to try to manage all of that, your job, your networks. So anyways, this model is intended to provide you with a framework for how you might approach managing these very desperate groups of people with whom you come in contact. And so I like to refer to it, I have the inner circle, which is your smallest group, are your ICCs. The outer middle tier is your high valued contacts, and that third tier is moderate value contacts. And these are all, as you see, powered by trust, I like to say, because foundational to all of this is the important it's important that you trust your network and that they can rely on you when the time comes. And so by putting and segmenting your network into these various categories, and you may be asking, well, what's the difference between, what I do for each? And so as an example, I'll share with you the ICCs, the inner circle contacts. So these are the people who you have the highest degree of trust in terms of your relationship. These are the people you share your hopes and dreams with, right? You're going to create that action plan that has your vision, your goals, and what you're trying to achieve. And you're going to try to align your activities and the people with whom you reach out to with that vision of what you're trying to achieve. And so you're taking a very, very strategic approach to it. And in terms of the ICCs, they are, as I mentioned, your most trusted. And so you want to make sure that you're cultivating those relationships. I would say typically you want to meet with your ICCs in person, but since we're physically distancing right now, that's not a good idea. However, you can still reach out via whether it's Zoom or I had a Zoom coffee with a friend of mine just last week. There are lots of creative ways that you can still stay connected. But the point with all of these tiers is to make sure that you are being intentional and segment your network, and you can leverage different strategies for the various groups. So for your, what I call your larger circle, right, where these are, you may have thousands of people in that circle. Obviously you can't have coffee with all of them, right? However, you could send out a newsletter, you could send them articles, you could, send them information that may be relevant to them. But the point is to stay in touch and make sure that your brand is remembered and that you are giving, whenever possible, supporting and helping the people in your network, so that when the time comes, you have already cultivated the relationships. You have already established the trust that's needed in order to be able to effectively achieve your goals. So I like to call this section Making It Real, right? And in the workbook, you'll see Making It Real as well. And the way to do that is you share knowledge. So always look to see what you can give, how you can be helpful, and don't wait for people to always ask. I know that not everyone is outgoing, not everyone is, the person who's going to pick up the phone, but at some point you need to take the lead. And so don't always wait to be asked. Look for opportunities to engage and to show that you can bring value to your network. And as I mentioned before, you want to ask for introductions as well. And because why introductions are very powerful, I mentioned that trust factor before. So if I know someone and have a great relationship with someone who is, let's say I'm trying to make sure that I'm bringing more, I'm looking for Latinx talent, then if I reach out to someone who knows me, they're likely to give me the benefit of the doubt if I am introducing them to someone else and can help to make that connection for them. So instead of that person having to start from the very beginning tier of trying to build trust with this other person, they have now benefited from my social capital and from my relationship capital. And so ask for introductions whenever you can. And also schedule virtual meetings. In this age of COVID-19, hopefully we won't be sheltering in place forever. However, as we're here in this place, be intentional about your outreach, using these tools, using LinkedIn, using whatever. And I'm actually going to launch one other quick poll. And let's see, we have, how you network. And so this one is, what's the #1 way that you network virtually? Yeah, Facebook, LinkedIn, email, Zoom, Google Hangouts, Instagram, or whatever other dimension you may use. And so people are voting. Dun, 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 dun. Okay, I'm being silly. So it looks like we have about 2/3 of the people voting. Give the rest of you the opportunity to do so. And one is already emerging way at the top, not surprised. And 4 more seconds and I'm going to stop the poll. Okay, let's see here. And ta-da! Not surprised at all. LinkedIn is the #1 way, not just for those of you who just voted, but also for many professionals in terms of reaching out and cultivating their network virtually. And so it's a very powerful tool. And of course, you can also enhance those services by upgrading. For those who have the premium accounts, there's so much that you can do. So take advantage of that. And again, there's no right or wrong answers, whatever works for you. And the important thing is that you're doing something to cultivate your network, to reach out to people who are not just like you, and to make sure that you are managing it effectively so that you can achieve your dreams. Okay, so that concludes that one. Let's see. And so that brings us to the I believe this is the end of my presentation on the laying the foundation. And so as I promised, we're going to take a few questions. Angela, do you want to share some of the questions?
We do not have any questions at this time.
Okay, I thought we had some from people who sent in, no?
Oh, yes, the ones that sent in, yes, we can tee those up because, oh, somebody just
Oh,
popped in.
actually, there are people who are, I think what's happening is people are putting they may have missed the instructions on that. So people are putting them in the, in the chat box.
Yes, so yes,
that's what's happening.
Right. Please use the Q&A box for your questions, but in the interim, let's tee up the ones that you've received in advance, starting with how do you keep employees engaged in civic engagement during this pandemic?
Okay, so the question is, how do you keep employees engaged during this pandemic? And I actually would love to give that question to have the panelists answer that question when they talk about their organizations. I'll give you a quick high-level view of what I think is. This is a wonderful opportunity for organizations to engage, both increase engagement, and you may think, oh, really, everyone's sheltering at home, but everyone's captive audience. So some of the things that you can do is to make sure you schedule periodic meetings, preferably frequently, at least once a week, with employees to just hear what they have to say. This is an opportunity to hear from employees, to build those bonds around inclusion, regardless of the level of diversity you may have, because inclusion really is about everybody. And so to just listen to giving people an opportunity to be heard and to talk about how they're feeling in terms of the global pandemic that we're in, and also to talk about how you can be helpful, because part of that, giving is always the first place we want to go in terms of trying to build relationships and networking. So that's something we can do. So what I'm going to do at this point in time, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for the presentation, and we're going to transition to our fabulous executive panel. And so just bear with me as I exit out of this. And okay, there they are. And let me put it in fabulous. Okay. Great. So once again, welcome everybody. And I'm going to start by because now we're not showing, well, people can see the names, I suppose, but Quincy Miller, who is the president and vice chair of Eastern Bank. Welcome, Quincy. So delighted to have you as a part of our panel. John Regan, who is the president and CEO of Associated Industries of Massachusetts. Welcome, John. Rita Allen, who's the president of the Boston Club. Welcome, Rita. And so we're going to kick off the panel discussion by first having each of them do a overview of their organization, a brief overview of their organization, and also give us their thoughts on the whole point of strategic networking and inclusion. So let's start with Quincy.
Okay, wonderful. Good morning, everyone. So just a quick couple minutes on Eastern Bank. So Eastern is a $12 billion community bank headquartered here in Boston, Massachusetts. Our real focus is a commitment to social justice, inclusion, underserved communities, while at the same time being able to deliver all the capabilities of the largest banks to our customers. For the past 10 years, we've been the largest lender in New England for the Small Business Administration. So we have a very strong commitment to helping our communities through the support of small business. But the other things that are critical to us in supporting our communities, we've been one of the top 10 philanthropic companies in Boston with over $10 million of charitable donations a year. because we commit 10% of our net income in support of our communities to charity each and every year. And Juliette talked about the idea of volunteerism, that question that came up. We're proud to say that we have about 2,000 employees here at Eastern, and our employees volunteer more time in total hours, over 50,000 hours a year, than any company of any size in Massachusetts. So being connected to the community and volunteerism and network is very special to us here at the bank. And so just a minute on networking. And I shared this story with Juliette, and she thought it would be helpful to share it here, which is, I've always considered myself a reluctant networker. And the other thing that Juliette talked about earlier was this blind spot that you could have around your strengths or your weaknesses. And for me, my blind spot early on in my career was my personality style. For those of you who may or may not have done Myers-Briggs, I am an ISTJ, and that first number, or that first letter, stands for introversion. And I've been that way my entire life, but for me, that was a blind spot. So as a young leader, I would have my managers say to me, you need to share your thoughts more, speak up more, get to know people outside of your division. You have this close network of people that know you, that appreciate you and understand how successful you are, but so many people don't. And that really was something that I had to work hard at. And honestly, I continue to work hard to it this day. I mean, most people that know me now in my role as president here at Eastern Bank would never expect that I am an introvert. But I'll tell you, I always feel more comfortable with a small group of people than in a room of 1,000. But for me to be able to be successful in my career, it's something that I had to do and get comfortable with, is being uncomfortable in networking. And it's been so impactful to me, that advice that I received very early on in my career. So that's a little bit about myself and my focus on networking and Eastern Bank, Juliette.
Thank you, Quincy. And John, let's go to you.
So good morning, everyone. Appreciate the opportunity to be with you all virtually as we work our way through what seems like the endless quarantine period here. Let me talk a little bit about AIM. We're a community of about 3,500 member companies from all across the Commonwealth. We have members in every industry, all sizes of companies. I know a lot of people tend to think that AIM represents just big business, but that's absolutely not true. We have thousands of small companies, and we're working to be more representative of the economy in the state from a diversity perspective. The organization about 2 years ago launched a D&I initiative. We've had a lot of work by the board of directors and by the staff, and Juliette's been kind enough to help us in terms of guiding our efforts in that regard. In terms of what AIM does for its members, we advocate for them. And our goal is to create a better state of business here in Massachusetts. We believe that business is a force for good and that our members are building a better Commonwealth. Obviously, these times are somewhat challenging in terms of how we carry out that mission. A lot of our work is on Beacon Hill, and right now, most of it's happening through the phone and through meetings like this. So we are anxious to get back to normal as quickly as we can. I think it's important to let you all know that one of the things that AIM's working on right now is developing a plan to reopen the economy, if you will, reopen business. I have a meeting this afternoon with the governor's reopening task force, and we'll present some ideas to them later today. And then we're gathering our own group of AIM members to try to figure out what's the right prescription for getting back to normal. So appreciate the opportunity to participate in this event virtually. And someday we'll actually all make it to Quincy for an in-person meeting and maybe a chance to meet each other personally and individually.
Yeah. Thank you, John. And Rita.
Hey, good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Hey, wonderful. Well, good morning. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of this important discussion, Juliette. And I feel really fortunate to be on the panel with Quincy and John. So thank you again. It's a pleasure to be here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Boston Club. And we are a professional organization connecting and elevating women in leadership. We have members of almost around 700 members that are senior, seasoned professional and executive women that really cover a wide range of demographics and personas, very diverse across all industries, disciplines, and ages. Our focus is on gender diversity and equity within organizations, and specifically in the C-suite and the boardroom. We are 44 years old, and we've really worked hard on our mission through the years, but still have a long way to go. And our purpose is about raising women and supporting them in their ventures, all women. And we believe that when there's more women in leadership roles, in visible, influential roles in organizations, that has a positive effect on organizational success, on business results, and society at large. It's a win-win for all. And the value that we offer to both our members as well as our corporate sponsors and partners is a few things. One is recognition for our members' accomplishments as well as women's accomplishments in general, access to one another as well as different business opportunities.
Oops. Rita? Looks like we may have lost Rita. So we'll come back.
Women leaders.
Am
Am I back?
Yeah, okay.
Okay, sorry about that.
She's back.
The downside of the virtual meeting, sometimes we go in and come back, so I apologize. Our number one strategic guiding principle at the Boston Club is to cultivate a culture of inclusion and belonging. And our motto is, no woman stands alone. And we do this through connections and collaborations. We work hard to connect members internally, as well as externally with our corporate partners and sponsors and other external organizations that we partner with and have relationships with. And this really is a differentiator for us. I know I've been a member for over 15, 16 years, and the connections, those relationships that I've built, the networking has really been so meaningful for me in a variety of ways. And also the fact that I could impact and make a difference in the advancement of women leaders. And also in terms of inclusive networking at the Boston Club, we know that diversity and multicultural awareness and competency are essential foundational leadership skills. And we strive to be very intentional and strategic in leading inclusively at the Boston Club. And so in that vein, we seek out diversity in every aspect of the word with intentionality within our membership, representation in our programming, our executive advisory council, as well as offering educational sessions to enhance our awareness, our knowledge and skills. For example, we've done sessions on unconscious bias, where we partnered with YW. We've done a session on privilege, partnering with Dr. Deborah Plumer. And we do this in all areas of the Boston Club. We really focus on education and awareness, providing tools and resources, and these strong external relationships, both with our corporate sponsors and partners, and also with other organizations, which we've had a long history of establishing and nurturing those relationships with organizations such as the Boston Women's Workforce Council, with the Women's Bar Association, with the Women in the Enterprise of Science and Technology, with Alpha, and we've most recently started a consortium that is made up of diverse organizations such as Alpha, the Boston chapter of Lynx, the Middlesex chapter of Lynx, as well as the National Association of Asian Professionals. And we're meeting regularly to provide and share resources with one another. And we're having a joint program next week as well. So we're really excited about that. So we really focus on internally, externally promoting diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And in all of our communications, they're influenced by guiding questions that we have at the Boston Club to ensure that we do this in a very deliberate way and intentional way. And we really do outreach. So to our male allies as well, our male colleagues as allies, and that outreach is really important to us.
Thank you, Rita. Lots there. Thanks for your leadership on that. And so our next question is around networking. Obviously, we talked about how important it is internally and externally, whether it's for talent, recruitment, development, business development, and what have you. And so the question is, as it relates to building inclusive networks, tell us one action that individuals can take to strengthen their cross-cultural networks. And let's see, who do we want to start with this? Let's start with John.
So, as I mentioned earlier, Juliette's been kind enough to do some work with us at AIM in terms of building our diversity and inclusion strategy. She's also been very kind in terms of helping me with networking. Obviously, since I became the president of AIM back in May and have been personally active in outreach to a much more diverse group of businesses. And I have one goal whenever I go to a meeting with Juliette. She delights in asking people if they've ever heard of AIM. And usually the answer is no. And so my personal goal, when we were actually going to meetings physically, was to run out of business cards. And I have to say that almost every meeting that I've been to with Juliette, I leave without a single AIM business card in my pocket. And I usually bring between 50 and 100. And it's been interesting, when you work for an organization, you kind of think, well, everybody must know who we are. And AIM's 105 years old as an organization. And what's become clear to me is that we have a lot of work to do in terms of making sure that people know who we are and what we're all about. Because again, our goal is to help business be successful and to help business build a better Commonwealth. And in order to do that, we need to make sure that we have businesses of every type as part of the membership. So again, anxious to get to that point where we can do that in person again. In the meantime, using LinkedIn, using Facebook, using email, trying to make sure that we're continuing to expand the circle of members in the association and to make sure that we're representing the full diversity of businesses in the Commonwealth.
Thank you, John. And Quincy.
Excellent. Thanks, Juliette. So I know you said one, but I'm going to try to go really fast and just give you a couple.
Okay, no, that's fine.
So first, internally, in terms of networking, and there's a bunch of questions on the chat around this or on the Q&A, but I think leveraging for companies who have employee resource groups, employee networks within their company, that's a great way to expand your network. Because get involved with a network that doesn't associate directly with you. And I think that's a way to make sure you make connections internally with colleagues across your company. And I just want to tie in, because one of the questions was that came in, how can these networks be effective today in this social, I'm not using distancing. What's the right word, Juliette?
Oh, well, we're using distancing. They're saying.
Yeah, we're still staying connected.
Physical distancing.
Physical distancing. Thank you. I don't want to say social distancing anymore. Physical distancing. But one of the great things that the networks can do is make sure that you stay connected virtually and understand the unique need of that network and what's going on in this time, and sharing that insight with your company, because that's invaluable. Different communities have different unique needs during these times, and we need to know that as a leadership perspective. From an external engagement perspective, there's lots of diverse associations. The partnership, Get Connected, Mass LGBTQ Chamber, Connexion, we've heard some of those. I've participated in the Get Connected speed mentoring events every year. They're actually going to be virtually this year. That's a great way to meet a diverse room of people from across Boston in different backgrounds. The partnership has their leadership development program, which isn't just about personal development, but it's about diverse networking, et cetera. And, you know, I think the last thing that I'll plug is keeping a broad mind. This is another conversation that was going on in the chat, but diversity goes beyond race and ethnicity, as so many of you have said already here today in the chat. It's really about a diversity of thought and people who are different from you for different reasons, and how do you engage them and bring them into your networks.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Quincy. And Rita.
Great. Yeah. And to add on to what's already been said, I think it always starts, like everything, it starts with ourselves. And to share a little personal experience too. Being an immigrant, I'm an immigrant, and you know, I've always appreciated and valued diversity of thought and background and experiences. And because of that, I think it enabled my curiosity. However, I have learned to gravitate towards people that have different styles and opposite of me. It's funny, I appreciated Quincy's story earlier because I always say, I'm the opposite. I'm an extrovert. And what I've learned to do is really appreciate being around people who are, and really connecting with people who are introverted, because it forces me to be a better listener, and it really helps me practice more reflection before I speak. So I seek out that, and I think in terms of, you know, action, it does start with that self-awareness, really heightening how well we know ourselves, what our biases and assumptions are, like you had said earlier, Juliette, and just being proactive to be open to new experiences, to initiate those, specifically seek out people that are different, people in new environments, people in new situations, new experiences. And I want to go back to what you said earlier too, Juliette, where identify specific targets or goals for yourself, and then create a plan and keep yourself accountable and disciplined to follow through. But it does require being curious. It requires our openness to know ourselves real well, but then also push out of our comfort zone, take an interest in learning about different cultures, educate yourself, and experience those cultures. Another way is travel. I love to travel, and through my travels too, that has really opened my eyes and taught me to be more open in terms of my experiences, my perspectives, my expectations, and balancing what works for you, that's comfortable for you, with what's uncomfortable, and really pushing out of your comfort zone so that you can have different experiences. And in my practice, my day job, I have a executive coaching and leadership development firm. And what I find is that, you know, if I didn't have this sort of openness, then that's really a great way to build business too. And so anyone who's a professional, you have to see this as not something that's being that you have to do, but something you want to do that yields results and gets you much more success, and being open to different ways of doing that.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. All fabulous points. Thank you all. And so our last question for the panel, and then we'll open it up because I know we have lots of questions, both from that were pre-submitted, as well as it looks like quite a few are coming in. So that is adapting to the new virtual reality in this pandemic environment that we're in. You know, what is your organization doing about that? Because so many people are struggling to find out, you know, what to do, what's available, what resources are there. So can you each speak to what your organizations are doing relative to that? And why don't we start with you, Rita, this time?
Sure, yeah, at the Boston Club, we've been offering our support to our members in a variety of different ways. The Boston Club is a strong community, and we always work to be there for each other, to support one another, and have this amazing spirit of service and connection. So reinforcing that ongoing connection has been important to us, and what we've really focused on. One of our sayings that I came across that we've been using a lot is better together. So we've been very agile. We've been creative to offer helpful resources as well as different formats that allow for that ongoing connection and support to our members and partners. So some of the specific things we've been doing, we have bi-weekly communications that include helpful information, resources, links, tips, and other kinds of valuable support, as well as ways to unwind and relax. You know, I mean, I've heard a lot of people talk about Zoom fatigue, and there's a lot of, and just what's going on at home. And, you know, and the topics, they cover various challenges that we're all facing as professionals, as leaders, as business owners, as parents, as caretakers, friends, and not to leave out self-care. Self-care is really important during this, especially as women. It applies to everybody, but as women too. In addition, we're holding weekly webinars, virtual events, as well as virtual networking. In fact, many of our members who are seasoned experts in a variety of different disciplines have stepped forward to offer their time and expertise in so many ways. One way has been by conducting webinars. For example, one of our members is Abby Maxman, who's the CEO of Oxfam America, and she put her hand up and said, I'd be happy to do a webinar on the global impact of COVID, which she has done. We have two members that are cardiologists with Regan Women's Hospital. They did a webinar for us on heart health and are doing another follow-up one. So it's amazing how all of our members have come forward. In addition, collaborating with some of these external relationships and partners we have through our Diversity Consortium, we are hosting a webinar next week conducted by a speaker from MGH as well. Also, we just launched the Boston Club Coaching Corner, offering complimentary one-on-one coaching to our members by many of our members who are coaches, including myself and Juliette. We want to be there for one another. We know this is a difficult time, and we have a directory of about 25 coaches who have stepped up to say we're willing to be, to offer this complimentary service. So we remain a group of a bond of diverse women, of the strength, the inspiration, the compassion, and humor to lift each other up. So that's how we're focusing on that outreach, so we can of hope to each other. Another saying that I came across that I'd love to share is, alone we are strong, together we are stronger.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you for that. And so let's go to Quincy.
Excellent. Thanks, Juliette. So here at Eastern, some of the things we've done, we very early on made a $10 million commitment to help with people impacted, with so many of us, obviously, from the COVID-19 pandemic right now. So that was $3 million in philanthropic gifts to areas from supporting food, supporting minority businesses, supporting our health workers, et cetera. We had a $5 million low interest small business fund that we spun up pretty quickly, that we've just reached that $5 million mark this week in that fund, and a $2 million fund for our consumer customers to be able to have a low interest unsecured loan to be able to help them through difficult times with really flexible repayment terms. And we're excited. Early next week, we're going to announce our next round of philanthropic giving in support of different areas impacted by the COVID pandemic we're all living through. A number of other things, though, and for those on the phone, this really goes to all banks. A number of supportive programs for our clients, particularly things like payment deferrals during this time, whether it's your mortgage, or a credit card payment, a personal loan, et cetera, being able to provide some flexibility to our customers during this time. And we've processed thousands of those in support of customers and businesses. This, in the banking world, it has been all payroll protection program through the SBA all the time for the last month. And I'm really proud of the effort. I've never seen an organization come together in such a short amount of time across so many departments in support of our customers. Eastern Bank's the #1 SBA lender in New England. We've been the #1 lender in for 10 years straight. In 10 years, we delivered 6,600 loans for about $500 million.
Wow.
In less than a month with the PPP Payroll Protection Program, we've delivered 7,500 loans for over $1.1 billion. So we've done more loans in 3.5 weeks than we did in 10 years. And the saying that we have here at the bank, because people have literally worked 24 hours a day, is every business that we get a PPP loan is one more business that can keep their employees employed, and that's one more family that could put food on the table for their families. And that's just not an Eastern thing. That's really all the banks that have been united from that in that commitment. And then finally, we have a close affiliation with our Foundation for Business Equity and the work that gets done there. And that group, led by Glenn Lloyd and others, have really done a lot of work around entrepreneurs and small businesses of color, particularly Black and Latino businesses who have been left behind, around helping them to navigate their impacts to their businesses. A whole coalition came together to form the Business Equity COVID-19 Emergency Fund. That's up to over $1 million. That coalition was, again, a network of partners from FBE, the Boston Foundation, Amplify Latinx, BECMA, Commonwealth Kitchen, Ujima Boston, and we're proud to be at Eastern, one of the early donors to that fund. And so there's a lot of great effort going on, but there's even more need. And we continue to be there to be able to support our customers.
Thank you. Amazing. And thank you for all that you're doing. It's just phenomenal. And John, last but not least.
Yeah, thank you. So a tip of the hat to Eastern Bank. Eastern is an AIM member. We're very proud to have you in the family. We have a lot of banking members. The numbers that you just mentioned are staggering and almost unbelievable. I heard from someone recently, and this is more towards the beginning of the PPP loan program, that in a very short time frame, the SBA did as many loans in that 10-day period that they had done in the previous 27 years or 22 years or something like that. So obviously an amazing effort, and again, tip of the hat to Eastern for all of the hard work that you guys have put in. I know it wasn't easy because the guidance was slow to arrive and changeable. So well done. In terms of how we're dealing with this new reality, we're working every day to make sure that our members have the information that they need to adapt to this pandemic. What we strive to do is provide information that's real time and accurate relative to all the government programs, changes, and rules that pertain to life in this new world. We are providing content now to members and to non-members alike, and we update businesses on a daily basis. I would mention for those who are on this webinar who are not AIM members, I would invite you to take a look at the information that's on our website. Right now, the content is all open. There's no requirement that you be a member to either utilize, download, share, and anything that's there on the site that you find useful, please take it and use it to help you understand what you need to do in this period. As I said, we update that information in real time, so you can be comfortable that whenever you go and look at it, it's accurate and it's up to date. We're also providing a much more robust series of webinars. We do a webinar every Thursday. They're 30 minutes in duration. We think that's a good time slot for people, and it's on a wide variety of topics. Again, open to members and to non-members. I would invite anybody on this call to feel free to jump on there and take advantage of the fact that the store is wide open, and we welcome your participation.
Thank you. Thank you. All fabulous opportunities and resources. And part of our commitment to it, we're going to be sharing links with the resources from each of the organizations that are represented here today after the session, along with that free workbook that I promised. And so with that, that brings us to the formal part of our discussion. Thank you, panelists. You all did a fantastic job, and I'm sure that our attendees would agree. I noticed that we have quite a few questions. And so, Angela, I know that there were some that were waiting before. Do we want to start with those?
Help if I get off mute. Yes, why don't we start with those initial that we have from. So
Okay.
how would you encourage employee resource group leaders to utilize this time effectively?
So the question is, how would you encourage employee resource group members to utilize this time effectively? And I can start, and anyone can join in. I think that this is a fabulous opportunity for resource groups to bond even more, and to also reach out to engage others, allies as well. And so one specific thing that I would encourage you to do is look at what other topics that you may have been meaning to learn about, and create a learning opportunity around it. So whether it's a book, let's say there's a wonderful book called Blind Spot, or whatever book or topic you all think is an area you want to delve into, and have everyone read the book and create a circle around it in terms of talking about the book, whether that's facilitated or not. I think that's a great way to keep it going, and also to make sure that you're supporting each other. So sometimes, as I mentioned before, sometimes it's good to have a meeting just to hear what people have to say and how they're feeling, not necessarily with a specific agenda. And so that's another thing that you can do. And lastly, but certainly very important, is take a look at your strategy. What is it? Most of the groups have charters. What are you chartered to do? What are your goals? And see what specific actions can you continue to do virtually, so that you're not just pausing, as some people say, oh, well, this is happening, we're just gonna stop altogether. No. This is the time to keep the foot on the gas and keep things going, so that you can make progress even in this time of pandemic. Anybody else wanna chime in?
So we provide a lot of content for our members. And I think right now everything is being done in a virtual way. And what we're finding, a couple of things. One, we do get great attendance. Those Thursday webinars, the average attendance is like 500, wow. Which is a lot of companies around Massachusetts who are participating in these things. And I think you're right, Juliette. I think now's not the time to pause. I think folks are anxious to connect. You can only sit in your humble little office talking to yourself for so long. And despite Zoom fatigue, or we use Microsoft Teams, by the way, they are a member. And it's a great platform. Just a little plug for another member there. And so, trying to make sure that we're providing that opportunity for people to connect, I think it's very important. The other thing that I think is important, and Juliette, you touched on this, is sometimes a little less structure and giving people an opportunity just to vent and talk and, say what's on their mind. I think that's also critical in this time for folks' own mental health.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Angela, next question.
Yep. So here's a question from Kenya. Once this pandemic passes and everybody starts returning to the office, there will be a challenge of social distancing. So what suggestions can you provide to ERGs to start engagement once everything gets back to normal in the office? And what do you see will be the major barriers to this?
Go ahead, John. So,
in anticipation of my conversation with the Governor's Task Force this afternoon, we've been thinking a lot about this. It's a very hard question to answer. I think the thing that needs to happen on a fundamental level is employees need to feel safe, and companies need to take steps to make sure that their employees feel safe. I don't know exactly what that means. I know there are elements of social distancing and extra cleaning and perhaps testing, self-monitoring, allowing people who don't feel well to stay home and continue to stay home and get paid. These are all the things that I think are going to be necessary for us to get back to something that feels like normal. What every company that I've talked to has said to me is it's not going to be like it was, and we're not quite sure what it's going to be or when we're going to get there. The call that I was on right before this call was with State Street Bank, 40,000 employees around the world, operations in multiple countries, and they're trying to figure it out. And the team that was on the call, there were 6 senior executives from State Street, and they're going back and forth. They don't quite know what to do. But the thing that was said over and over again is, if an employee is afraid, they're not going to force them back to the office. It's an invitation that you're free to decline if you're frightened. And I think that's the measure of getting back to normal, is when people feel safe.
Mhm.
Juliette, I would just say, you know, the things that John all highlighted, I think are spot on. I think the biggest fear of this COVID-19 is the unknown. And the unknown of coming back to work is, you know, just as much of a fear. And so what I think it's going to take is, you know, particularly these large companies, like you talked about, State Street, larger companies, you know, like Eastern, working through, seeing what the best practices are. You know, how do we do things differently? But I do have to agree, it will not be the same. I think it won't be the same for multiple reasons. One, this pandemic has sort of forced us to figure out how to work differently, and then also learn that we actually, for many of us, not all, but for many of us, we actually can work this way. And so I think, to John's point, companies will be much more open and willing to have that flexibility. And I think that it will be up to us to be able to then share those best practices with companies across Massachusetts. You know, because we will have had different experiences, we had different resources, and we can then share best practices with the company that has 100 employees, 20 employees, 5 employees. I think that's going to be a role for business to provide. In this task force that the governor's put together, it was an excellent idea to bring those best practices to light.
I wanted to add one quick thing. I did ask the folks at State Street and Quincy, to your point, about the companies that have resources and the ability to come up with best practices. Smaller companies don't have the same resources, nor do they have they're busy doing a lot of other things. And so I asked the gang at State Street, when you're done with your plan, will you make it publicly available? And they said that they would. Excellent. So I think that's the type of care for your neighbor that is going to be different. And I know a lot of other companies have published their own go back to work documents and made them publicly available, because I've used some of them to create my testimony today. But it's one of those things where having the generosity of spirit to say, look, we just spent hundreds of hours putting this together, but we're not going to keep it for ourselves. We're going to give it away.
Yeah. Thank you. Angela, I'm seeing one here that's popped up. Perhaps I can read that one to the panel. How are you measuring D&I success in your organization? Rita, do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, I think that's always, measurement is always difficult. And I think we have, you know, some quantitative and qualitative ways of measuring that, in terms of, you know, certainly increase in membership, as well as retention and, you know, attrition, and watching those numbers very closely, and intentionally, again, putting initiatives in place that that targets goals that we have so that we can improve on those numbers too. And qualitative ways really include everything from, I mean, we do member surveys so that we gauge how members are feeling about a lot of topics, including inclusion. We also have regular roundtables with members so that we can hear what they're thinking and what their concerns are, what they're happy with, what they're what they're satisfied with, so we can continue to leverage the things we do well as work on those things that we don't. We also have a lot of research that we conduct. Of course, we have our annual census that we have done for many years, for 17 years, in conjunction with Bentley University, that publishes the top 100 Massachusetts publicly held companies that have 2 or more women on their boards, and we put that out every year. And because of this report, we've actually had many companies that did not have any women on their boards finally take notice and start to actively and intentionally and strategically put women on their boards because they did not want to be on our report as the 0 zeros, those that have 0 women on their board as well as in their C-suite. So, and again, we try to really have conversations one-on-one as well as in, group settings with members so that we can gauge satisfaction and improve upon it. Because believe me, we still have a long way to go. We have a long way to go. And in terms of making sure we have more women of color and, diversity as members in the club, as well as our programming that we do. We make sure we cover all, we have representatives from that represent, diverse perspectives and thought, as well as bringing in, a lot of times on our panels, we will also have male colleagues too, because they are allies and they play a big role in our mission as well. So those are just some of the ways.
Yeah. Thank you, Rita. I know we're going to be winding down with time here. I want to answer a question I see in the chat that is, and pose that to the panel. It's from Bonnie, and the diversity goes beyond race and ethnicity, disability, LGBT, educational background, etc. Diversity of thought is key to strategic networking. Oh, it's a comment. Okay. Absolutely, totally agree. And then there's another question. Diversity of geography is one I always add, where we come from shapes our worldview. A Northwest person differs in awareness, etc., from a Boston person. I worked at a giant non-profit where I wagered that 90% of the employees came from, okay, I'm sorry, I'm reading these, some of these are comments.
Yeah, they're mostly comments in the chat.
Okay.
But there is a Q&A question.
Right.
I'll just throw out, which companies have already published the return to office guidelines?
So I would recommend a few. One is the National Business Roundtable has put out a document that describes sort of broad principles for when states should open, and then drills down into specific industries. It's probably the best and the easiest document that I've seen. The National Association of Manufacturers has put some stuff out. So too has the United States Chamber of Commerce. The one company that put out a very detailed how to reopen your factory was the Rand Corporation. And I've forwarded that to several of my manufacturing members, and they have found that one to be quite useful. I hope that helps. If you're looking for more resources, you can shoot me an email and I'll try to gather them up and forward them to you, whoever asked that particular question.
Okay. Right.
And then AIM, so you know, AIM will be putting out its own blueprint probably mid to late May. And will be plagiarizing heavily.
This is being recorded, John.
And there's one more question here in the chat. What percentage of diversity does your company have? massive.
So Juliette, why don't I just, I'll take it quickly, I'll give you an example at the top of the house and then inflow. Because we can spend a lot of time on how we cut the data at every level of the company. But here at Eastern Bank, we start at the board of directors. So diversity is really about all levels within the organization. And so our board is more than 50% women and people of color. Our last two lead directors have been African-American, and Deborah Jackson, the president of Cambridge College, is our first female lead director, African-American woman, and we couldn't be more proud of that. There's a long-standing history there. We also focus on driving diversity through hiring, which is obviously the key to being able to have a diverse organization. Last year, our diverse hires reached 40% of our hires last year at Eastern Bank were people of color and diverse people who say that they are diverse individuals. And in the banking industry, that number is almost unheard of. But what I'd end with is the reason why I came to Eastern, because of our commitment to diversity. Having lived, my entire 20+ years career as usually the only person of color, and the youngest person in every executive position that I had. And again, this is the importance of diversity, to be able to be at an organization where we do not think we're good enough. We think that our diversity is not where we want it to be. And most people in Boston look to Eastern as a model, and we don't think it's acceptable. And I think that's what is about building a diverse organization, when you're never satisfied. And you do look at diversity, again, as has been stated here, that it's beyond just race and ethnicity, but really background, diversity of thought, et cetera. It makes us all better companies.
Excellent, excellent. I know we're at 11:27, and I want to give Rita a quick, maybe if both people want to answer, but if you could do so very succinctly, 30 seconds.
I'm sorry, Juliette, which question did you want us to?
So the question was the diversity of your organization.
Yeah. Diversity in the Boston Club, we do define in many ways. We have women that represent various industries. We have various specialties. I can't give you the breakdown of all of those, but they cross over from accountants and lawyers to scientists to healthcare, higher ed, business owners. We do see an increase in that. About 35% of our members are business owners. And we also have age range from anywhere from their 30s all the way to their 80s. We have diversity in that respect as well. We are Boston based, but we have some geographical diversity as well. And women of color, we're at about, we're under 20%, and that's a number that we strive to continue to work to build. But it has come a long way since over the years. So, I'd like to say that's the good news, but it's absolutely, we're not satisfied there, and we work very intentionally in building that. So, yeah.
Thank you.
I can say at AIM, we have a lot of work to do. And it's one of the reasons that we've asked Juliette to help us. Our board of directors in 2015, and this is the metric that I'm paying the most attention to, we had about 16% female directors and a little over 5% directors from communities of color. In 2019, we've increased the female representation to about 35%, and the people from communities of color is about 11%. So obviously a lot to do, and we're committed to doing that.
Excellent.